All right, what's going on, sports fans? How you doing? Hopefully, you're having a great day. I know that I am, and I'm glad to be in front of you for a few moments to talk about Celtics Sixers from last night. Now, if you didn't catch it, really good game. Um, Turned out to be somewhat of an instant classic. Might have been one of the better games that I could remember from the past few weeks. It was a game that had wild swings where we saw, the Sixers have pretty sizable lead. Celtics slowly chip away. They themselves ended up with a nice lead. Sixers chip away. And then we had two end of game situations. One that was, pretty incredible to help get the Celtics the lead. And then a potentially incredible game winning shot at the buzzer by Embiid, but he was just slightly, late in getting it off. So all that led to the Celtics beating the Sixers 110 to 107. So looking at the game, this was a game that kind of made it evident what Brad Stevens was talking about from last season when the Celtics lost in the finals to the Warriors. His message coming out of that series was depth. Need more depth. Because in that playoff series, it was basically Tatum, Brown, and then you never knew what you're going to get from the other guys who played. He went out, got a Malcolm Brogdon, who's a consistent, steady player, was willing to take a bench role because he understood in Boston he would get his minutes. Derek White, got to give him a lot of credit with his elevation in his play over last season. He's become a very dependable player. Horford, steady guy. You could probably say, well, he's definitely one of the leaders of the team because the team likes having him around. They look up to him. They respect him. Marcus Smart, another leader on the team. You pretty much know what you'll get from him night in and night out. So overall, instead of just relying on two guys, they now have, five, six guys that if one of the top two's off, you have guys who can pick up the slack. That's what we saw. So, looking at the Celtics box score, they had six players in double figures. Jaylen Brown led the team with 26, but they got, let me see, 18 from Tatum, who we'll talk about in a little bit, 15 from Horford, which all basically came in the third quarter when he hit the 5 3-pointers, where the Sixers, the lineup they had on the floor, they couldn't handle Missoula's lineup with Horford and Grant Williams out there. Two perimeter guys where you're putting Embiid in actions where he has to make decisions, packing the paint and then having to run out to chase a guy off the three. He wasn't doing it. So Horford, like I said, knocked down the 5 threes. Grant Williams had, he struggled most of the night, but he did knock down a three in that stretch there at the third when the Celtics found themselves down 15, but then slowly started chipping away at that lead where they got it to like 8 to 10 and kind of kept it there as they were starting to play a little bit better offensively. But Robert Williams gave you 14, Smart 10, Derek White 18. So that's a pretty balanced stat sheet from those six guys. Now, I also mentioned when one of the two of the Jays aren't playing well, it's good to have that kind of depth. Last night, Tatum was the one who didn't play necessarily great. He only had 18. He averages, 30 a game. He did have 13 rebounds, so he contributed there. He had 6 assists, contributed in that aspect. 3 for 8 from three, pretty good. But he was a -6, and actually so was Jaylen Brown. So those guys didn't have the best game because Brown had his 26, 10 for 21 shooting, so about 50%. The 4 turnovers, and Tatum had 5 turnovers. You'd like to see those numbers come down a bit for those two guys as much as they do handle the ball, especially when Marcus Smart's not on the court. But as a team, they had 12 turnovers, which isn't necessarily a killer because we've seen Celtics teams, especially last year, where I think it was a bigger deal than ever. I mean, they would throw out there a 20-plus turnover game. So all things considered, against a Sixers team that plays physical defense, 12 turnovers, fine with. But it was that contribution. It was the ability, like I said. They went into the half down 6, came out in the third quarter. Sixers made a little push, got the lead up to 15, was their largest lead in the third quarter. Then the Celtics started to play better, like I said, hovering around 8 to 10 most of the way. Then got into the fourth, and there was a key moment in the third leading into the fourth. I feel like at that point, Tatum had been struggling, and he was getting good looks. He had a couple of threes that rimmed out. Seemed like it was being one of those nights where he might not be able to hit anything. But then late in the third, I believe the Celtics had gotten the lead down to like 2, maybe even 3. And I believe he hit a 3, which I think gave them their first lead late in the third quarter. And it seemed like you could see he was getting more comfortable in the game, because there were stretches before that where he looked off offensively because of the struggles, and Tucker or Maxey, whoever were playing defense on him, was making it difficult. But knocking down that 3 seemed to help the team and himself out. And then with all that, I believe they found themselves leading at the end of the third quarter by a bucket. I believe they're up by 2 going into the fourth, which was kind of wild to think about, because as bad as, like I said, Tatum looked, Brown even had a couple of his struggles. And for as good as the Sixers played in the first half, because if you look at the Sixers, Embiid gave you 41, which, I mean, that's kind of what he does against the Celtics. But what I like is that the Celtics have basically treated him like they do with Giannis, where they know Giannis is going to get his. They just try to make it as difficult on him as they can. But in doing that, limit what the other players do. Because where you could fall into trouble with Philly is like, if you allow Embiid to get 40, but then you let like Harden get 30, Harris get 25, something like that, and Maxey gets like 20. Then you don't need as much from PJ Tucker. You don't need as much from DeAnthony Melton. Those other guys off the bench there. So Embiid, 41. He had his 18 free throws, which, it's going to happen. He's a physical offensive player. He gets a lot of foul calls. A lot of those are intended because defenses don't want to give up easy baskets. Some of them are 50-50 because he will create as much contact as the defender. And it's just whichever way the ref wants to call it, it is what it is. But the biggest thing was the other guys didn't go off. At least early on, it seemed like you're going to get a good PJ Tucker game. Offensively. Defensively, he does what he does. He had 16 rebounds, but he only had 7 points. In the first half, it looked like he might have dropped, 15, 20. But he started struggling from the field. He only went 2 for 7. And to be honest with you, I don't know if he made a bucket in the second half. Tobias Harris, I believe he had like 15 in the first half. Looked like we might get a big Tobias Harris night. He ended the game with 19. He didn't do much in the second half. And outside of the points, Tobias Harris gave you 0 rebounds, 1 assist, and 1 steal. And I'm sorry, but Tobias Harris is always going to be the weak link with the Sixers. Since he's gotten that big contract, he hasn't lived up to it. Last night, you can't tell me that for a guy as athletic as Tobias Harris is, you don't get a rebound at all. How's that possible? But whatever. Then Harden. Harden scored 21. Wasn't an impactful 21, at least in my eyes. There were several moments in the game, several stretches when Embiid was off the floor. Now, Embiid played 40 minutes, so there's only 8 minutes he was allowed to sit. In those minutes, the offense ground was non-existent because Harden, let's be honest, like his offensive game for as, I guess, visually unpleasing it is to watch, it was brutal last night. Those minutes when Embiid was off the floor, Harden was supposed to take over, or Maxey, although it seems like because of Harden on the floor, I don't know if Maxey doesn't feel like he's allowed to do what he wants. I don't know. It seems weird, especially watching him last night with those two on the floor together. You know, Maxey went 4 for 10, but I know Maxey's a better player than that. You know, when it comes, as a Celtics fan, when I'm looking at the Sixers, Embiid is the number one threat to me. I honestly think Maxey is the second biggest threat on that team because unlike Harden, Maxey is very shifty. He's athletic with the ball. Maxey could very easily pull up from 3 or drive all the way to the rim. Harden, not so much. But Harden is a ball-dominant guy. So I feel like when those two are on the court, Maxey, part of his game is taken away. But, that's Doc Rivers' decision, which I know Doc Rivers, to a lot of Sixers fans, is under the hot seat. Well, under the microscope, I'll say. Because, if this is another Sixers team that's like one and done in the playoffs, I don't know how Sixers fans are going to handle that. But like I said, Embiid had his 41. The support was there in the first half. But it seemed like as soon as the Celtics started breaking into that 15-point lead and ultimately took the lead late in the third, it seemed like the Sixers bench was deflated after that. Then the Celtics themselves turned that into a 10-point lead in the fourth. I believe Embiid was off the floor. He came back on. All of a sudden, it was back down to a 2-point game. So Embiid was the best player on Philly last night, but the rest of those guys, they didn't show up when needed. You could credit some on the Celtics defense. You could credit that with probably the Celtics playing better and putting even more pressure on those Sixers guys because it seemed like early in the first half, Sixers were kind of playing free and easy because they had a decent cushion while Tatum was struggling. But Tatum started to get a little bit better. Horford, like I said, had the stretch. Rob Williams was active on the boards. 3 offensive rebounds was key. It kind of knew that once they took the lead in the third, they had a 10-point lead in the fourth. The Celtics probably had the game in hand. But like I said, the little run with the Sixers when Embiid got back on the floor made the ending to this game very interesting. Because then talking back about Tatum struggled for most of the night, for sure. He only had 18, 7 for 17 from the field, 3 for 8 from 3. The key number, he only had 2 free throws. Most of the season, I believe Tatum averages like 9, 10 free throws a game. The fact he only had 2 last night probably contributed to the struggles. But like the good team that I've seen the Celtics team, turn into the last couple of years, even more so this year, like I said, with the added pieces that they brought in, this is a team that doesn't get down. They scrap. They try to find ways to win when Everything's not necessarily working because we've seen a lot of games this year where, Tatum's hot, Brown's hot, like guys are hitting threes and they're just blowing out teams. There's those moments in games like this. You can look at the Milwaukee game from a couple of weeks ago, where I believe Brown was out, Smart was out, Horford was out. Tatum actually might have been out that game too. It was basically like the B team for the Celtics with a bunch of bench guys going up against Giannis and the actual starters there. Took that game to overtime and then ultimately won it. That was one of those that you could like mark down as a team building game that may pay off later down the season because those bench guys had to pick up so much of the slack. This is another game you could point to where Tatum did not have a great game. Brown had a good game. It was up and down game for Brown. But Derek White and Brogdon. Brogdon only had 5 points, but the 7 rebounds. He just seemed to be a steadying force at times when the game could have gotten away from the Celtics. So the stat line may not reflect it for Brogdon, but if you watch the game, trust me, Brogdon had a good game. Derek White with his 18 points, 2 for 3 from 3, 7 to 9 from the field. Derek White's a guy who, when they brought him in last year, some questions about him. He struggled towards the end of the last season, but he's come in this year. He's played more consistently. His confidence seems to be there this year. So I feel like the trade from last year definitely is paying off this year. He's more consistent with his perimeter shot. He takes it without hesitation now, where last season, if he was struggling, if he didn't make like the first 2, he'd be reluctant to take that third one. Now, if the shot's open, he's just catching it and firing in. For the most part, they're going in. We're also starting to see him do a little bit more off the dribble as well. If they close out to him on the 3-point line, he'll up fake, couple of dribbles in, pull up in the mid-range. He'll get to the hoop. So he's kind of getting back to that Spurs player who was very versatile. Now we're starting to see that more and more this season. Because of that, this team's going to be much better off. But the final moments, like I said, the game was tied. Yeah, it was tied at that point. Celtics had an out-of-bounds play. They ran the play that they did against Cleveland, if you remember from a little bit earlier in the season, where Tatum starts in the backcourt, one-on-one with his man, makes a quick move. They throw it in a smart bounce pass to Tatum. In Cleveland, Tatum took it to the rim and dunked it. I believe that's a dunk over Jared Allen. This game, last night against the Sixers, he took a dribble inside the 3-point line, then step back, pull up, knock down the 3. So it's really good out of timeout play that obviously Joe Mazzulla likes going to. This was a variation on that play. So the building's going crazy, at least the Celtics fans that were there. There was a good number of them. Philly fans had kind of, couldn't believe what happened in that game. To be up 15 at one point, look like you're going to run away with the game, and now you're down 3. At that point, I think it was like 1 second left. Doc Rivers had blown through his timeout, so there was no timeout to be had to, advance the ball to half court. Then try to create a 3-point opportunity that way. So they threw it into Embiid, took a couple of dribbles, launched it, and went in. It was after the buzzer, though. So the Celtics ended up winning by 3, 110-107. That sequence, though, I did find it fascinating how Mazzulla and his usage of timeouts have been such a talking point this season. Even though the players love it, but fans kind of pull their hair out at times because of Mazzulla's lack of timeout usage. That game last night kind of showed you why he does things the way that he does. Late in that game, he had like 4 or 5 timeouts left, while Doc only had 2. So Missoula, late in the game, when the game was on the line, could call timeout after timeout to make sure he drew up the perfect play. Because at that point, execution was vital, where Doc had to be, you know, I guess vigilant in terms of not vigilant, diligent. Sorry, when to use them because he only had two left, so he used one. I think a couple, like a minute before that one, he used his last timeout. So in that case, where you needed a bucket because you're down three, you didn't have one. But when the game was tied, Missoula had a timeout. That's where he could set up that play between Smart and Tatum to get the three to go up three, which ultimately won the game. So, I talked about this on another episode when Missoula, they took the interim tag off of him. I feel like he's a good young coach. Van Gundy kind of talked about it on the broadcast as well, that even though Missoula hasn't had the experience in the NBA, but those couple of years that he did coach, I guess that was high school or lower level college, I believe it was, he said that is just as important to a young coach because it gives you the chance to find your voice, which, maybe that set him up in a better position taking over for this Celtics team in a very difficult situation, coming off a finals run with another good coach in Udoka, with that offseason that the Celtics had, for him to be thrown into that as an interim, that could be tough on a guy for his first job in the NBA. But he seemingly has found his way. The players love him. They respect him. He's he commands the huddles and the timeouts and all that. So I'm interested to see where both of these teams go from here. Also another episode that I did about storylines. Celtics and the Bucks seem like they're destined to be 1 and 2 in the East. Sixers probably lead the group outside of that in the East in terms of third best team. But games like last night for the Sixers, I don't know how encouraged, Sixers fans, you can let me know down in the comment section how you feel about the team, but I don't know how confident you should feel about going up against either Celtics or a Bucks squad that are very deep, pretty well coached, where, Sixer fans have questions about the depth on the Sixers, questions about Doc Rivers at head coach. Like I said, let me know what you think about the Sixers. But I mean, for me, with the Celtics, like, a lot of pressure on this team to win it all this year. I kind of think Missoula, could be the right guy to get it done. Now, of course, with the NBA season, it's all going to be about who's healthy come playoff time, matchups and all that. But, the Celtics lead the season series against the Sixers 3-0. They have one more game, I believe early April, like April 4th. I mean, the Celtics could end up sweeping the Sixers in the regular season. I still don't view them as a big threat come playoffs because of games like last night. I'm not worried. I'm not necessarily worried about them as a Celtics fan. To me, it's the Bucks and the Heat. If the Heat figure it out, the Heat are always one of those teams that give the Celtics the tough game. That's probably the two teams, and then maybe Cleveland, because Cleveland's given them so much trouble in the regular season. But we'd have to see Cleveland in the playoffs as well. This is a new group that they put together. How well do they perform in the playoffs where it's a little bit more physical and late game possessions are vital? Now, they did bring in Donovan Mitchell, who's really good at those situations, but we saw with Utah, sometimes it doesn't work out. So I think those are the three teams, the Bucks, Heat, and then probably distant third, Cleveland, that myself as a Celtics fan really worry about. Now, Celtics fans tuning in, let me know probably how you'd rank the teams as threats to the Celtics. I mean, I think the Celtics are the best team in the East. Milwaukee's a very close second. When you have Giannis, you're always a threat to me. the Heat, because of Spoelstra's coaching ability, Spoelstra doesn't need the most talented team to get his team very far. He just knows how to make in-game adjustments and all of that. And plus the addition of Kevin Love, we'll see what that does for the Heat. But I think the Heat, if they figure it out, get to the top 6, I think they could be a team to look out for. But outside of that, a lot of question marks in the East, and I include Philly in that group, to be honest with you. But thanks for tuning in. Hopefully you enjoyed this episode. If you did, you know what to do. Like button, subscribe, and share. We're pushing through, trying to be consistent as I can with these videos. I will get back to live streams eventually. But make sure that you do subscribe, hit the notification bell as well. That way when I do drop an episode or I go live, you will know, immediately. So thanks again. But God bless. Have a great rest of your day. Be safe. And I'll catch you in the next episode. All right. Have a good one.